So you can see we're here where we left off in the last video. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and close all this out, and we're going to go ahead and open up GNS3. Let's go to the website GNS3, and if you're doing physical gear, you do not have to follow along with this. I'm not going to show you guys how to set up GNS3 100%, but I did want to give the link to the setup. You just come here and do a free download. You select your environment. If you're doing Windows, Mac, or Linux, you will do that. And then they have these great install guides of how to set it up. If you're following along, you can certainly set up an environment. You can run GNS3 on your computer and use a local server. In my case, I have a virtual machine set up. That way I can use a lot more compute resources. So you can see I've gave it 20 gigs of RAM. And I think see here, I gave it 5 CPUs, but you can certainly install GNS3 as it is. So I will drop a link in the description for you guys to actually get that set up. But once you get it set up, you will be presented with a screen similar to this. And we're just going to say Network Automation Lab, say Auto Lab. We're going to OK that. And I will very quickly show you, if I go to Preferences and then I go to Server, this is just me tying in actual virtual machine to my GNS3 environment. So I just came under here, put in the host, give it the port of 80, put in the admin credentials, and that was it. It was able to detect that server. And then now any devices that I install will actually get set up on that. So let's just build a very quick topology here. I'm not going to try and get too complex with my environment. I just want to maybe add in a couple routers here that we can automate to. And then I also want to bridge that. So it's browse all devices, and we're going to look for this one called cloud. And we're going to go ahead and drag that in here. And we'll just connect this device here up to this cloud, and then let's go ahead and connect these devices up as well. Actually, let's do one better. Let's go in and we're going to delete this link. Let's put in a switch. We'll just do Ethernet switch here. And this comes pre-built into the GNS3 environment. These other ones, like these Arista switches and iOS switches, ICE, all these other ones I added in there myself. You could certainly find images online. I'm not going to provide any. So what I'm going to do now is just connect up to these switches. We've got all this now connected up. We're just going to go ahead and start all of these devices, and what this is going to let me do is it's going to let me actually bridge it to my physical environment. So this cloud is going to act as a bridge. This is essentially going to be like I am physically plugging these devices up to my network, and that is something that you'll have to set up inside of whatever you're using for GNS3. If you're doing it on your base computer, it's very simple, but on the actual virtual machine itself, we just want to make sure we have a network card plugged up, and we want to make sure that that is the adapter. So you can see it gives us this MAC address. We want to make sure that is the adapter that we're bridging to inside of our GNS3 environment. And if we head over to Ethernet interfaces, we can say show special interfaces, and from here it shows you all of your interfaces. You just want to make sure that that is the interface that you're bridging to, your physical interface. So let's go ahead and double click on one of these devices. Let's actually take a look and see where everyone's at. Looks like we're still booting, which is fine. We'll hit enter just to make sure we have some type of session. Now we're going to leave our dummy switch here just on VLAN 1. We're not doing anything special with it. You could use a Cisco switch here. You could use whatever switch. Once again, if you're following along with this and you're using physical gear, I'll try and put down in the description a time where you can skip ahead to while all this is going on. So we have these devices booting. Once all this is booting, I will be right back with you guys, and I'll show you from there. So we are back. Our devices are actually booted up. So I'm just gonna go ahead and configure it, and I'm going to go to the interface that is facing my switch, and I'm just going to turn on DHCP for this interface. And what this will actually let me do is grab a DHCP from my actual physical network, which is what I want to do. So we'll see that the device, the interface has came up, and if I do a show IP interface brief, you can see that it grabbed an IP address from my physical environment. Here's the actual console log message showing that, in fact, I did grab an IP address. So let's go ahead and jump over to our other devices here, and let's do the same thing. We're just going to say IP address DHCP, and we're going to no shut it. And then while that one's doing that, let's go ahead and jump over to our final device here. And we're just going to do the exact same thing. We just want to make sure that these devices are actually getting an IP address. And no shut. So that should be very basic. We're not going to do anything else very special other than just getting the IP addresses up on these devices. And you can see I have an IP address there, and this one shouldn't be far along behind. So let's open up a notepad, because what I actually am going to want to do is create a way to SSH to these devices. So what I'm going to do is just give it a basic configuration for being able to SSH. So we'll do IP domain name, and we'll just do lab. Say key generate RSA. And then what I want to do is go to or we will say transport input SSH. And one other thing I want to do is create a username and password. So we'll do username Cisco, and our secret be Cisco 23. Let's go ahead and copy all of this over. And it did not like my crypto command. Let me try including it with it like that and see if it'll take it. Let's just enter here. We'll exit and try that again. Whoops. So it's not liking my crypto command. So we'll just manually do that and see which way it likes it. So let's do crypto generate. Well, that's probably what it is. To do that, crypto, yeah, crypto key generate RSA question mark, and then it's going to give me a couple of options here. We just hit enter. Oh, that's what it is. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. That's probably what it told me up here. I just didn't see. I need to define a host name, and that's what I didn't do. So let's give it a host name. We'll just say this is going to be router 3, and let's try that again. Choose a size, greater range, blah blah. How many host bits? I think it took at that time. Transport input SSH. So all that looks good. We're just going to change this to 2. And go ahead and copy this over to this router over here, and this will give me SSH access to the devices, but it's also going to let us incorporate our Ansible inventory. So we're going to exit, and let's just do a verification command. We're just going to say show IP interface brief, and let's make sure we can actually ping our default gateway for this subnet, which would be 1. We can do that. Let's just, for the heck of it, try pinging out, so we can actually ping a DNS server, which is fine. We don't need that, but we just want to make sure we have basic connectivity. Let's, of course, make sure that we can ping our automation setup. So we're going to go over here, and we're just want to set IP address, and we're just going to copy that. And we, of course, want to make sure that we can ping our Linux environment. Give that a second, and of course the first one drops for ARP, but we are able to ping, so that's great. So we've got our basic setup so far. Now let's go over here and to our network environment, and let's incorporate all these. So we've got router 1 here, we've got router 2 and router 3. So let's go over here and let's go ahead and go into our host file. So we're going to go back and to hosts, and we're just going to change these. So I'm going to do an I for insert, and we're just going to say router 1, router 2, and let's copy this. Let's go down, paste it. Let's go ahead and make sure these spaces do matter, so make sure you line it up. And then now let's go ahead and input the IP addresses. So let's scroll down. It looks like we're on router 1 here, so let's just do, well, actually can already see it there. So let's go up to router 1 and we're going to put in the IP address here. So we'll just do 10.28.30.171.99. So we're going to put that in. And then last not least, let's go over to this device, do show IP interface brief, and let's go ahead and punch that in here. And so now we have all of this connected correctly. So we've got all of this put in. So we're going to go ahead and escape, right quit. And just for verification again, we're going to take a look at that, and we can see that that looks good. And again, the spacing does matter, so make sure that you space it correctly or it's not going to. So once we have those spaces set up correctly and we're pretty comfortable with it, we're going to go ahead and make a simple host file, or excuse me, a simple playbook to actually make sure we can talk to those devices. We can verify just you know, from a network perspective. I don't want to get too broad with this, as far as, I mean, there's a lot you can do, but we just want to make sure we have network connectivity to those devices, and we verified that in our last section. So now what we're going to want to do is actually go and configure. We're going to create a new directory, and inside this directory we're just going to name it group_vars, just like that, and we're going to cd into that. So we're going to cd into group vars, and from here we don't have anything. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create variable files. So we're just going to say r1.yaml, r2.yaml, r3.yaml, and what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to name this whatever your hosts are. So whatever we named it up here in our host file, so these don't have to be, so I just named them based on what the device name is. You don't have to do that. These could be whatever, as long as it matches whatever you're going to create in your group vars. And you can even create you can create structures here. So you could make a new directory called R1, and then you could cd into that, and yes, we want to remove that, but you could R1, there we go, make sure that's gone. You could create a directory to clean it up, and I actually do encourage you to do that, so that way you don't have all of these devices just sitting out here, because if you have a network with hundreds of devices, you're going to have hundreds of these files, and it's a lot easier sometimes to find if they're, you know, individually foldered. So you could create a folder called R1 and have that YAML file inside of there. You could have R2 in its own folder, but for the purpose of this video, we're just going to leave it as is. So let's go ahead and go into edit one of these. So we're gonna go. Hey guys, it's Chad here from the future. I did want to break in during this moment to actually make a clarification. So in the video demonstration, you'll see here in just a moment, I ended up changing the group vars folder name to host vars, and I wanted to elaborate just a little bit more on the difference between those choices. You can actually have both, they can coexist together, but what the group vars will specifically do is allow you to create host groups. So if you'll notice in the video, I created a group in my host file called all. So if I wanted to, I could create that groups vars folder and put inside of that a YAML file called all.yaml. And then when my playbooks are running, it will look for that group vars folder. And so instead of having to create separate individual YAML files for every single device, you could have a group of all or iOS or whatever group you wanted to create, and then you could create those runtime variables inside of that groups folder. Instead, what I ended up doing in this video is creating a host vars folder, which you'll see here in just a moment, and inside of that, those are individual host files that I will set up. So again, you certainly can do that, or you could do the group vars if that's easier for you, and especially if you have a large environment where your credentials are going to be the same, you'll probably want to go the group vars route. Whereas if you have a smaller environment and nothing is the same, you could do the host vars file. I just wanted to clarify that. Back to the video. Into our one.yaml, and all we're doing here is defining the variables for our device. So we're going to insert, we're going to start the Ansible file off. So we're just going to say Ansible network OS, iOS. So here we're just specifying what our operating system is on the device, and these are runtime variables for this device. So anytime that we're calling on this device, what it's going to do is going to look for that group vars. So, well, first of all, it's going to find the host. So it looks in the host file. Once it finds that host and it's going to run it, it's going to look for variables for that host. And Ansible knows to look inside the group vars folder for those variables. So this will be able to set those to variables. So we're going to say Ansible user, and we created a user called Cisco. Then we're going to say Ansible password. Here we're going to specify what we said earlier, Cisco 123. Then we're going to say Ansible become, and we're going to set that to yes. Now, in our environment, when we log in, so let's go ahead and make sure we can do that. Let's open up PuTTY real quick, and what we're going to do is we're going to go 10, 28, 30, 98. And we're going to accept that, and let's make sure that we can sign into. So we typed in Cisco, and this time we're in, so we're on router 3. So you'll notice what it did was it brought me into the first mode when you first sign into a Cisco device. So we need to be able to get it into privilege mode so that way it can run our commands, and we also need to let it get to global configuration mode. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure all of these devices with a enable password so that way it can actually escalate. So let's go ahead and exit, and let's go down and we'll just say enable secret, and we'll make it the same. Just do Cisco 1, 2. So let's go ahead and paste that in here. And now if I jump back over to this session, I should be able to type in that enable and then Cisco 1, 2, 3, and now I can jump in here. So now I would be able to run all of my commands that I would need to, but also configure. So you want to make sure that you do that. But now what I can actually do is for my Ansible become, I just tell it yes, and now I will actually set up Ansible become method, and then I just tell it enable. And then if I could type, what we're going to do is we're going to tell it what that is. So we're telling it to escalate, but we're also now going to tell it what to escalate with. So we're going to say become password, and we're going to tell it that is Cisco 1, 2, 3. And then we're just going to close this out. So, oops. Escape, right quit. So actually what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove, let's remove r2.yaml. Let's also remove r3.yaml. And let's copy to CP, I think. And then it's going to be r1.yaml. to r2.yaml and then r3 as well. So that way we just have an exact copy since all of our environment's the same. So now that we've got that set up, we've got our host file set up, we've got our group vars set up. Now we can actually get down to the bread and butter of this video, and that is actually configuring our host file to do something. So what we're going to do is I am going to open up a program to let me connect in, and that is called WinSCP. And from here I'm going to put in our IP address to my Linux box, which was 30, probably should remember this, 195. And what this will actually let me do is view the folder structure of those devices, so I can actually use something to create my file. And I recommend, I probably should have told you guys this earlier on, you can do this and it will certainly make editing these files a lot easier. We're just going to do edit, and then when we click at it, we can actually configure WinSCP to use whatever editor that you prefer. So I've got my default set up as Notepad. I'm going to edit that because we don't want to use that. Let's browse, and let's go to our program files, And let's look for, let's see, got several editors on here. Let's find Visual Studio. I do have Visual Studio Code, so let's go ahead and open that file location. We're just going to copy that, and we're going to come over here and paste that, and we're just going to tell it to use that as our editor. Okay, that. Okay. Choice but to open inside of Visual Studio. We're just going to tell it to remember this decision for this workspace, and we have our playbook here. So now we can actually modify this file here, and when we do that, it's going to automatically upload to our directory here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start this file off like we would with any YAML file correctly. So now we're going to specify hosts. So we're telling we have excuse me, we're going to say name, and from there we're going to name it what our playbook is. So my playbook, and we're just going to say all here. So if it were a particular host that you wanted to do, you would say R1. If it's just everything, you could say all. Now if we created groups, so let's say for instance in our host file we created a group called access, we could actually call on that group, and all of that is stuff that we set up earlier. So if we go back, let's go take a look at our host file. You can see we set up R1. We could certainly create a container called access and put these hosts in there, and I'll show you that in another video. But we're going to get this playbook set up. And to do that, we're just going to call on a group called all, which is what we set up here. And so when it runs this, it's going to look inside the group all. It's going to find the host, and it's actually going to run this on all three of our hosts. So we're just going to tell it like that. And then we're just going to give it some other variables, gather facts. We're going to turn that to no. That is just basically turning off almost like a debug mode for our environment. We don't want to do that. And then we're going to say connection, and how we're going to be connecting to these devices is network CLI. So we've got that set up. Now we want to actually set up our tasks. Now this is the part of the playbook where we actually set up what we're trying to do. This is kind of like the initialized state where we're gathering our runtime variables. We want to make sure we've got all of that set up correctly. So if any of it fails, it's probably because of your variables or your spacing. You know, YAML's very particular with spacing, so if for whatever reason you're having problems, just make sure everything's spaced correctly, and then you can troubleshoot it usually pretty easily with Ansible, and that's what makes it very great. So we're just going to name our first play, so we're just going to say name, and we're just going to say show commands. So that's all we're going to do. We're just going to send some show commands, right? And then from there we're going to actually tell it what we're using, and so we're going to say iOS system. Now let me show you where you can get all this from. So what this is a module inside of the playbook. You can actually head online and you can type in Ansible modules. And when you go to their website, you'll find all these different modules that you can use. So we're doing a network module. And you can see there's a bunch of different things, but in our case, we're using Cisco. So we'll just go back and let's do Ansible Cisco Ios. And here's all the stuff that we can do with this. So I used iOS system in this case because we're going to be doing some things with iOS system, but actually what I should have done was iOS config. We'll take a look at that, and if we scroll down we can see some of these examples. So you can see here we're actually sending some lines, but since I'm wanting to get some information, I'm just going to send a command to just do a show command. So let's actually go back over to our Visual Studio, and let's change this to iOS config. And let's just use one of those examples that they have in here. So you can see that here we're sending no shutdown commands, and in this structure it's very easy to understand, right? So we're calling on a module of iOS config, we're sending a certain line of no shutdown, and we're parenting that to this interface. So we want to make sure that this interface is where we're doing that. We want to make sure that it configures it, this part of the section. We it's going to apply to this a parent line essentially. So this is going to actually run before our commands do, and this is just tying it together. Now you don't have to use parent in this case. You could certainly configure a line above this shutdown to tell it to go to this interface, but you can use the parents to make sure that it configures this first, and this is actually best practice for that. So I don't actually see anything in here that's what I'm trying to do, so we'll actually configure that together. So let's go under here, we're going to say iOS config, and then what we're actually going to do is tell it lines, and here we are going to configure a certain line. And so in my case, what I actually want it to do is I want it to send, we're going to tab over, and we're just going to say show IP interface brief. And what we're going to do is we're going to register that to a variable. So let's try that. We'll try it together, and then of course if this doesn't work we'll come back. So we'll just say register, and we're going to register that to output. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a second task inside of this playbook. So we have our first task here that's going to reach out to the device, going to run show IP interface brief, and theoretically it should register that to a variable of output. So we're going to go ahead and enter, and we're going to make a new play inside this playbook, and we're just going to say show output, and we're going to come down here. And now here's where it gets a little interesting, right? So all we did is we told it here, you know, whatever we wanted it to do, but here we could do a debug in our case, and our debug is going to be a message of whatever our output is, you know, whatever it is. So we'll just say var equals output. Let's close that, and we'll actually save. So I'll just hit Control S, and what that should do is send that back over to my Linux environment. So we're just going to hit more, and let's take a look at my playbook just to make sure all of that looks good, and it does. So let's go ahead and try running this playbook, and fingers crossed we have everything set up correctly. So once again, we are in our directory, so let's try our first playbook. So we're going to do Ansible, and we're going to say dash playbook, and then now we're just going to tell it to run my playbook. All right, so I actually figured out what my problem was. It's not supposed to be groups vars. Groups vars are pertaining to our groups. So what I did wrong is I have the groups vars, and inside of my groups vars, I included my host vars, and you're not supposed to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to cd out of this, and we're going to make a new folder called host_vars, like that. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to actually, let's remove that, and we'll just rename the other host vars, and we'll just say move vars like that as host. Yeah, so what we're going to do is sorry, I got sidetracked. So we're going to do host vars like that. We're going to ls, and now we have the correct folder structure. So let's hit the up arrow a couple times, and let's actually try rerunning our playbook here. Shouldn't have any problems now unless our playbook's wrong. So unsupported parameters for iOS config module register. Yeah, so that's what I actually figured. There was something wrong with my playbook itself. So yeah, so I was right earlier. I did iOS config like this. Let's change this to iOS command. I shouldn't have second guessed myself. And then we're just gonna say instead of lines, we're just gonna tell it to send a command. And we could include multiple here, so we could list off several commands, and we're just going to register the output like so. The only other thing we're going to do is we're going to change this down here to debug like so. We're just going to hit enter, and we're going to send a message essentially. So we're going to do message like that, and then we're going to send our results. So what we have to do is include that variable, and to do so we create two curly brackets like this. We'll do output, and then we're going to enclose those with two other curly brackets, and that's how you display variables inside Ansible. So what we did here, we registered this command's output essentially as a variable called output, and then all we're doing down here is displaying that. So we'll just, oops, I did not mean to do that. So we're going to save that. The spacing really does matter. So what it was doing was it was looking inside of a module for iOS command, and it was looking for a register inside of that command. But in my case, this register is a completely different thing. So we want to save that and now rerun it, and this should work. Fingers crossed. Hey, so from the output that we had up here, you can see that it ran the task show command. So let's go ahead and bring this over a little bit. It ran the task show commands. You can see that it reached out to all three of my devices and did that, and then it ran the task of show output, and then it gave me that output. Now you'll notice here they are a bunch of different things. So we've got all these new line breaks, we've got all these different brackets and stuff. So let's clean that up a little bit. We're going to come back to our output. We're going to say .std out underscore lines, and all that is we're telling it to look for the pretty version of all that output, because you can see up here we've got all this jumbled up, and then we've got this pretty. So we just want to display this pretty version essentially. So we're going to say lines like so. We're going to control S that, and let's just clear because we've got a lot going on here. We'll hit the up arrow key and we'll rerun that playbook. You can see that it is doing show commands now. It's going to reach out to those devices, and now it's going to give us the pretty version of the output. So we can come here and we can see all of our interfaces here, and we can see that that is working as planned. So that's going to pretty much wrap up this video. And in this video, I'm going to have to do a lot of editing because there were a few things that I did incorrectly, and some of that I'm going to leave in because I do want to stress the importance of this. A lot of this is trial and error, right? So if you don't have a programming background, or you don't have any background in this type of stuff, it's a learning experience. So if things break, try and Google and figure out why they break. You know, nobody's going to know this one. And it is okay to Google. It is okay to make mistakes and figure it out. And that's why I recommend, you know, set this up in a lab environment and then play around with it inside of your production network, because at the end of the day, this is going to be something that is going to help you do your job a lot faster. I mean, in this case, you know, I've got very vital information that if I had to go to these devices and run these one by one, these commands, and get this output, that may take a while, especially if you were wanting to get the output of hundreds of devices. You know, we could certainly then take these outputs and register them to a file. So you could set up your playbook to, instead of outputting this to console, you could output to a Git file, so that way you could look at the differences. Let's say you had this playbook run every day. You could certainly take a look at your interfaces over you know, a week time span and look at the differences of them. So it's really, really, really cool what you can do with all this stuff. And I really encourage you guys to really play around with it. So that's going to be it for this video. We're going to jump into our next video in setting up our network management system, or our network monitoring solutions, what we're going to set up in the next video. And then I'm going to show you guys a custom Python script that I wrote that will actually let you take that all of the information that is inside network monitoring solution as far as your hosts are concerned. And so essentially what you'll be able to do is you'll create a host inside your network monitoring system, and then you'll use my file to pull those hosts inside of your Ansible configuration for your hosts. So that way, whenever you add a new device to your network, all you have to do is go in your network system, add that device in, and then Ansible will do the rest. So theoretically, you could add a device inside of your network monitoring system, and you could, depending on what system you could use, you could have it fire off webhooks. Like if you use NetBox, you can use a webhook fire off when you add a device. It would reach out to that device and configure it if it's a new device. There's a lot of things you can set up, but in my case, all I really wanted to do is when I add a device in my monitoring system, I wanted to add that device inside of my configuration file for my host. That way I don't have to manually every time I add a device and add that. So I will show you guys how to set up that in the next video. I greatly appreciate each and every one of you for watching. As always, if you have any questions or concerns or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me and I will do my best to answer. So again, thanks guys for watching.